debate. The Honourable Member for Timmins James Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As always, it is a great honour to stand in this House representing the people of Timmins James Bay who put their trust in me to speak for them. I'm very pleased to rise to speak to Bill C-44. This is the first time I was spoken in the House in debate since the brutal attack at the Cenotaph and the attack on Parliament Hill. And I'd like to begin by reflecting a little bit of what I experienced of that terrible day. I certainly experienced the sense of relief when I found that we were safe, and the thankfulness for the incredible security who put their lives literally on the line to make sure that we were safe. I felt an enormous sense of pride, not a bullish beating the chest pride, but a quiet pride, watching the Canadians around me who went about their day unafraid and helped each other. And it reminded me that no matter what our differences in this nation are, that there is a sense of community that will not be intimidated. And the last thing I felt that day was a real anger, an anger that the House of the People had been desecrated by violence. And I felt it standing. I went out in the early morning at about 5 in the morning, and I went to the Cenotaph, and I saw a crime scene tape. And I was so angry that such a symbol of who we are as a nation could be cut off from us because it was suddenly a crime scene of this kind of mindless, hateful violence. And it did make me feel very angry. But I think as Canadians, when we reflect on how we deal with this kind of violence, it's incumbent upon us to take that sense of anger, to take that sense of pride, to take that sense of relief and step back and say, what is it that the Canadian people expect from us to ensure that they're safe? Because we are dealing with some very, very complex issues that are now being thrust before us, Mr. Speaker. In terms of Bill C-44, this bill is not a response to what happened last week. This is a bill that's been on the order paper for some time, and I think it's important that we look at it in that light. There's certainly specific elements that need to be examined and will need to be examined clearly, which is why we want this to go forward to committee. The role of CSIS in terms of their international role in spying and maintaining coverage in terms of potential perpetrators who may be overseas. Certainly we see with the issue of radicalization and people who have gone overseas that this is a question that does confront the House, that we need to address it. We know that CSIS has been found to have breached the courts and the laws of our land on numerous occasions. In the 2007 HAPE decision, 2008, Justice Blanchford found that Section 12 of the CSIS Act did not contain the extraterritorial provisions with respect to covert intelligence, and even in 2013, Justice Mosley said that the practice of these seeking warrants for foreign surveillance was not legal. So this bill needs to look at how the actions of CSIS will be done within a legal frame. To put this in context, though, Mr. Speaker, to maintain the notion of legal provisions that will protect the Canadian people have to be seen in terms of the resources that exist or do not exist to actually follow through on no matter what laws we bring forward, but also the issue of oversight. Because the issue of oversight is the issue of whether or not, when we debate laws in this country to offer police more tools, whether or not we make sure that these tools are being applied for where they were intended, and that they are not necessarily opening the door to all manner of warrantless intervention on the lives of ordinary Canadians. Now, in terms of oversight, the government has a fundamental problem. If they feel that CSIS needs the tools and CSIS has to be the frontline fighter in the terms of international terrorism, the oversight mechanisms have been abysmal. The Prime Minister appointed Arthur Porter, a notorious international criminal who's sitting in a jail in Panama, and he was chosen to sit on the oversight body of CSIS. I would think for the Canadians who witnessed the attack last week, they would not be comfortable knowing that the man who was supposed to be making sure that our spy agency followed the laws and had the tools necessary was being looked after by a man who's now sitting in a Panamanian jail on all manner of charges and allegations. The replacement for him was Chuck Strahl, a former minister in this House, but we found out later that Chuck Strahl was acting as a lobbyist for Enbridge at a time when CSIS was apparently spying on anti-Enbridge activists. So that damaged the credibility here. We know from the Arar recommendations from the Arar report, where Maher Arar was sent to foreign jurisdiction and tortured wrongly, that he was an innocent man, that one of the recommendations from the Arar report was that we have better oversight of these provisions. And this is important so that we make sure that there are no more cases of the Maher Arars who are innocent but seem to be in the wrong place at the wrong time and are rendered because at that, the feeling of the day is that we do not follow the rule of law. The rule of law is the essential. It keeps us separate from the kind of bandits that we're seeing who may want to attack who we are as a nation. The terms of resources, the fact that this government is cutting $687.9 million from its overall security in the coming years. The fact that $180 million is being cut from border security. So to tell us that they're going to get tougher in terms of protecting us, well, limiting the resources that are used to protect us certainly raises questions about its overall credibility. We see that the recent privacy commissioner's ruling on the RCMP and their warrantless access provisions, that the RCMP don't even have an ability to track how they're gathering information, under what circumstances they're gathering information. So do we need to look at rules that may provide the better tools to go after potential threats? That's certainly the discussion we should have. But when we have a request being made every 72 seconds of a telecom by a government agency wanting personal information on Canadians, that is certainly not within justification. The fact is, Mr. Speaker, contrary to the Prime Minister, these threats, the killing of Warrant Officer Vincent and the killing of Corporal Cirillo, these were not killers who washed up on our shores, as we were told last week. These were homegrown Canadian men. The Prime Minister said that our international allies would be standing with us as we went after the man who brutally killed Corporal Cirillo. But where were our international allies when he was going into a McDonald's with a stick trying to get himself arrested? Clearly, the rhetoric does not match the reality here. The reality is we are not talking about what happens when people fall through the cracks and become increasingly marginalized. We have the snowplow killer. We have the bus beheader. We have people who, in mental instability, do terrible, brutal crimes. And the RCMP telling us in the case of Mr. Bido, we were glad that they were able to seize his passport, prevent him from going anywhere else, but he was not on their terror watch list because he was considered mentally unstable. So we need to understand, if we're going to actually respond to the brutal crimes that we saw, that we put in provisions in place that protect us. So in terms of Bill C-44, the reasonable step here is to move it to committee to see what are the provisions that CSIS needs in dealing with international radicalization, especially if someone who's trying to go to a place like Syria or Iraq to engage in the murderous activities over there. What are the provisions that are still within the laws of this country? What oversight will be there to ensure that CSIS does not abuse its function within the country of Canada? What role will we take as a federal House of Commons to address the fact that there is clearly a problem when Canadian men born and bred in this country can fall so far from the norm that they can pick up any kind of murderous death cult ideology because of all the matters of instability of drugs that we saw, their broken lives, the fact that they were living on the streets. There are other people out there who may be in that same situation, whether they identify themselves as radical or not. What are the provisions that we're going to put in place to ensure public security? So, Mr. Speaker, this is a long, ongoing discussion we need to have in this House, but we need to have it within the context of figuring out what works, what resources are in place, and what will maintain the overall standards that we have to the rule of law in this country and the fact that we are an open, democratic, and unafraid society. Thank you very much.